Are there any? I call a member for Fairfield.
Thank you. On Friday, the 30th of April 2021, the Vietnamese community in Australia, New South Wales Chapter Inc. held a candlelight ceremony to commemorate the 46th anniversary of the Fall of Saigon. This day is also known as National Resentment Day. The commemoration was a solemn event which acknowledged the adversity, struggles and sacrifice of millions of South Vietnamese men, women and children against the oppressive communist regime of the North during the Vietnam War and the eventual fall of Saigon. The Vietnamese Cultural Centre Bonnyrigg was the venue for the commemorative event, with members of the VCA, former South Vietnamese Defence Force personnel, parliamentary colleagues, New South Wales Labor leader Jody McKay MP and Wendy Lindsay MP, representing the Premier and local councillors in attendance. On the 30th of April 1975, the South Vietnamese bastion Saigon, now known as Ho Chi Minh City, fell to the People's Army of Vietnam and the Viet Cong. It was a bitter battle and the South Vietnamese fought long and hard to maintain their territory and democracy, which unfortunately was overtaken by the rapid advancement of the Viet Cong forces. This day was significant. For the world, it meant the end of the Vietnam War. However, for the South Vietnamese, it meant their country was now one nation under communist rule. 7.5 million people died in this conflict and many more were displaced. Disheartened by the prospect of community oppression, many South Vietnamese took to the seas and fled in hope that they would find a better life in another country. There is no doubt that although the atrocities occurred many decades ago, the pain, the wounds and the psychological scars remain. The commemoration played video footage from the Fall of Saigon period, with personal stories being told by community members of the treatment by the brutal communist forces. The personal stories remain painful to this present day. Accounts from Vietnamese refugees outlined situations where they were stricken on leaky boats, some left floating aimlessly in the ocean with no food and water for weeks on end. Sadly, many merchant ships neglected their maritime duty to assist the stranded vessels and sailed past these stricken vessels. Thousands of lives perished at sea, never making it to dry land, with either their vessels sinking or being taken captive by pirates only to receive barbaric treatment at their hands. The more fortunate ones landed ashore in Malaysia, Hong Kong, Indonesia and other parts of Southeast Asia, and thus began their search for freedom through refugee camps. Thousands were resettled in developed countries like the United States of America, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom and many parts of Europe. The Vietnamese community in Australia, under the leadership of President Mr Paul Huy Nguyen and Vice President Ms Kate Hoang, continue to strive to keep the plight of the Vietnamese people in our hearts to this very day. Along with the committee members of the VCA and the wider community supporters, they continue their fight to highlight the human rights violations that occurred then and continue to occur to this present day. Although this was a terrible time for the people of Vietnam, it began for many the journey towards Australia and freedom, albeit as refugees. We are lucky as Australians to have so many wonderful Vietnamese people here in Australia today who have been brought to us as a result of this conflict. The Vietnamese people in Australia have added to the Australian fabric of life, and we are grateful that they have shared their traditions and culture with us. Although born of a terrible time in Vietnamese history, the presence of the Vietnamese in Australia has enhanced the Australian culture in a unique way. It has brought some extremely talented people in our midst. We are fortunate enough to be able to share in happy experiences too with our Vietnamese brothers and sisters, such as the New Year celebrations, the Tet Festival and the exquisite flavours of Vietnam in Vietnamese food. We join with Paul Nguyen and Kate Hoang and the Vietnamese community each year to pay our respects for those who have perished throughout the Vietnam War and continue to honour the survivors of this terrible conflict. We commiserate with them over the loss of their loved ones, the loss of the basic human rights and the loss of their freedom. And we will continue to remember and honour those who perished on this day and throughout the Vietnam War.
Private member statements. Having concluded, community recognition statements will now be proceeded with. Are there any community...
Speaker.